It is said that Eldanesh was the first of our people, fathered by Cernus, the hunter, and birthed by Isha, the mother. At first, he lived alone upon the barren face of our ancient home. The world upon which he lived was empty, and as he gazed upon its barren expanse, his forlorn heart ached. So Isha, in her motherly love, wept a single tear of sorrow for her mortal son. Where her tear fell burst forth the first life. Sunlit skies, verdant forests, and deep oceans sprang into existence, and with them all the creatures of land, air, and sea. And Eldanesh rejoiced in her love, feeling only boundless gratitude towards Isha. It is this love that the Mother Goddess gifted to our people. In those first days, Eldanesh and the first of the Eldari communed freely with the gods, and from them they were granted the gifts of insight and emotion that would drive our people to greatness, and yet doom them also. In harmony did gods and mortals thrive, yet all would soon come to ruin, for even the gods themselves were slaves to their own desires. Long before the birth of Eldanesh, Cernus and Liliath were bound in courtship. Cain, lord of murder, looked upon the betrothed with furious envy, for he had long borne an unrequited love for the maiden. By every method he could conceive did he seek her hand, and yet at every attempt he was denied. So did jealousy smoulder and burn within the god's bitter heart. Much time passed until Cernus's boundless desire saw him spurn Liliath in favor of Isha. By their union was born Eldanesh. Liliath hid her jealousy behind a facade of smiles and laughter, her envy curdling to resentment. One night she saw a vision of Cain being torn apart by an army of mortal warriors. A plot of vengeance began to form within her mind. In secret, Liliath did whisper into the ear of Cain, describing unto him the horrors she had witnessed in her mind's eye. The Lord of Murder perceived her words as prophecy, and took up his blade. Just as Liliath had planned, Cain's fury had been awakened. The war god resolved to slaughter every mortal Eldari. Liliath smiled broadly, for Cernus and Isha would soon know true grief. So did Cain stride into the mortal realm and vent his seething anger upon Isha's children. When the mother learned of his murderous onslaught and the suffering he had wrought upon those she loved, she wept uncontrollably. Her keening wails of grief ripped through heaven with such anguish that almighty Asuyan could not help but hear them. The Phoenix King soon learned of all that had transpired. Asuyan, with the same wisdom he gifted to the Eldari, forged an impenetrable barrier between heaven and the mortal realm. So was Cain's murderous rampage halted, yet Isha knew no end to her sorrow, for though her progeny were safe from the attentions of the Lord of Murder, she could no longer communicate with her beloved offspring. How poor, sorrowful Isha wept for that which she had lost. She had been torn from her children by the Lord of Murder's jealous rage and her own father's pitiless justice. Cernus, too, felt the pang of sorrow within his breast, until he could stand no longer to gaze upon beloved Isha's wretched misery. To Vorn, the master smith, Isha and Cernus pleaded for aid, knowing that only he could undo Asuyan's celestial artifice. Vol, uncle of Cernus and Isha, while reluctant to break his brother Asuyan's decree, could not bear to hear his niece's weeping. He sympathized with her plight and agreed to aid the parents' cause. From Isha's streaming tears, He forged waystones that sparkled like stars. Through these shimmering jewels, Isha could once more speak to her children. And so she did. Isha and Kurnos taught much to the Eldari, keeping their communication with their children secret from their fellow gods. As time passed, the two became arrogant, certain that none would discover their transgressions. In one such careless moment, Cain overheard them. Bitter, jealous, and desperate for vengeance, Cain brought all he had heard to his brother. Disappointment and anger coursed through Asuyan in equal measure. He had been disobeyed because of parents' love of their children, but he had been disobeyed nonetheless. Though it pained him greatly, Asuyan declared before his fellow gods that Isha and Kurnos were to be turned over to Cain to do with as he saw fit. The mother and hunter were secured with bonds of flame and scorching iron, and cast into a burning pit to endure the torments of the Lord of Murder, far from the sight of mortals and gods alike. For countless years they suffered Cain's torments, deprived of the light of the heavens, and severed from the children they so loved. Vol begged Cain to show mercy on his niece and nephew. Guilt racked his soul, for he had aided them in their scheme and longed to see them freed. After much bargaining, an accord was reached. The master smith would forge 100 swords for the Lord of Murder, each mightier than the last. In return for Vol's artifice, Cain would free his prisoners. Cain granted Vol but a single year to complete this task. Vol labored day and night, fashioning blades the like of which no mortal hand could strike. Each was a wondrous work of art, wrought in star metal, sun bronze, and the dust of shattered nebulae. Yet, as a year drew to a close, Vol knew he had failed, for a single sword remained incomplete. To conceal this failing, which would have seen his agreement with Cain voided, the master smith turned to trickery. Amongst the newly forged weapons, he hid a blade of mortal construction. When Cain discovered the deception, his rage was terrifying to behold. Branding Vol a cheat and liar, he demanded vengeance. The war in heaven had begun. This conflict cast the gods against one another, and the heavens shook with the thunder of battle. The Eldari, too, were divided by conflict as the fighting bled into the mortal realm. Only great Asuyan, in his infinite wisdom, refused to align himself with any other. Thus, when the war ended, the Phoenix King remained Lord of Vol and Cain both. The final battle of this conflict saw Vol and Cain cross swords in single combat. Vol wielded the blade Anaris, Light of Dawn, the 100th blade he had promised to Cain, now completed and imbued with all the art of his mastery. Despite the might of Anaris, however, Vol could not match Cain's martial prowess. The Forge God was overpowered and cast out of heaven. Broken in mind and body, Cain would later enslave Vol, strapping him to his anvil with iron chains of his own creation. Cain roared in his triumph and reached down to claim Anaris as his own. Yet, at the moment of the Lord of Murder's victory, Falshu the falcon, consort of the great hawk, descended to pluck Anaris up in his great talons. As Cain cried out in impotent fury, Falshu bore the glimmering weapon to the heavens. Cain's rage burned bright and hot once more. Still he sought vengeance upon those who had wronged him. Long ago, he had fought side by side with Eldanesh, the Lord of Murder, granting his mortal student many victories upon the battlefield and promising him further power in return for his fealty. The upstart mortal had refused, and instead taken the side of Isha and Kurnos. So did Cain descend upon Eldanesh in a murderous rage. Falshu, seeing the fight unfold, bore into the hands of Eldanesh the great sword Anaris, a hope that this blade may grant the mortal hero a slim chance of defeating Cain in battle. However, even armed with Vol's finest blade, Eldanesh was no match for the god of war. Before he could so much as land a blow upon Cain's towering form, the mortal champion was torn apart. The war in heaven had ended, with Cain its final victor. The Lord of Murder held Anaris aloft and let out a bellow of triumph. As he did so, Falshu and a great hawk descended from the heavens and took in their talons the broken body of Eldanesh, bearing the dead warrior's corpse aloft and setting it in the firmament. There it became the Red Moon, which dominated the skies above the Eldari homeworld for eons, as a constant reminder of the great champion's bloody demise. It remained there until our people descended into depravity, spawned that malefic being we know as She Who Thirsts, and saw the heart of their empire consumed by corruption and evil. However, Cain's slaughter of Eldanesh would not be the final act of the war in heaven. That honor would fall to Asuyan. So appalled was the Phoenix King by the slaying of the first lord of the Eldari, that he laid upon Cain a curse. Eldanesh's blood would forever drip from the Lord of Murder's hand, reminding all of what he had done. Thus, he has been known ever since as Kayla Mensha Cain. Cain, the Bloody-Handed.